And that's Sid Rosenberg. Sydney, what's happening on this Friday?
Zachy, happy holidays. Great to be back with you. I just heard a promo from my good friend JT the Brick. He's on your station at night. That was on his show, in fact, just last week before the Giants and the Raiders. He does the Raiders stuff. He's a great host. And my question for you before you interview me is, big show today for you, Giants and Eagles. You're killing it in New Jersey. But, of course, somewhere in lower Manhattan, Mike Francesa is ending his storied, and he'll be the first one to tell you, his storied career later on this afternoon. What is Bob Gelb listening to right now? His son with Sid or Mike Francesa on the way out?
You remember Pip? I always remember Pip picture in picture, and you get both screens on. I would have to imagine he has me on in the background and Mike echoing through the hallways at 345 Hudson Street. I have to imagine.
All right, good, because I know that his loyalty is he loves you and he's proud of you as I am, and you're doing great. And he's not a big fan of Mike, let's be honest anyway, but I know that at least if you're in that building today, you have to act like, oh, my God, is the earth going to stop spinning tomorrow now that Mike Francesa will not be back in Lower Manhattan on Monday? We all know, by the way, that with his 30 great years, and they were great, and he may very well be chapter number 1 in the sports talk host book of fame, that in the end, everybody's going to be just fine without Mike come Monday.
You know what? Sources have told me, and this is some inside information, that Bob Gelb has actually volunteered to hold open the door when Mike leaves at 6:30.
Oh, I doubt that. But I tell you what, Bob Gelb may very well open the door if, I don't know, 3-4 years from now when they find out that the trio that they hired to replace Mike just isn't right. And maybe Bernie decides to spend his long afternoons on the beach on Long Beach. Maybe he opens the door for Sid and Zach somewhere down the road at WFAN.
I like continent, but I could deal with that if I get a nice contract to go up to New York. Yeah, I'd
Boy,
definitely do that.
you love the continent. I know.
He's been very good to me in my career. Very good to me.
Listen, he's a nice guy, and I know he worked in Philadelphia, did a decent job. For me, he's fine. A lot of the guys that work for Mike and Chris, whether it's Mark Malusis, who I happen to like personally very, very much, or Carlin, they all try to be like Mike. And there's only one Mike Francesa. And a lot of these guys have pretty good personalities and are pretty smart to begin with. And I tell them all, just be yourself. Stop trying to be like Mike. Everybody in this business tries to be like somebody else. Everybody wants to be the next Mike Francesa or Chris Russo or Jim Rome or Dan Patrick. Just be yourself. And in the end, if that's not good enough, you're not going to make it anyway. And to me, Chris Carlin is one of those guys who tries a little hard sometimes to be somebody else. What do I know?
Talking to Sid Rosenberg from 770 WABC. Hey, it's no secret. The last few years, you and Mike don't see eye to eye anymore, but it is an end of an era of radio excellence like we've been talking about. Have you reached out to Mike in the last few days, or did you try to get in over the last few days?
No, I didn't try to get in. I kind of jokingly sent a tweet out today that I called Mike at 5 o'clock, but I did send Mike, a text yesterday. The last time Mike and I texted each other, in fact, was last February 2016, and it was 17, up to 17, excuse me. And it was a very ugly text exchange. Of course, it made news in New York, a big story in the New York Post and Daily News, and I just talked about it for months. And, Mike got pretty nasty on the text, and so did I. And we have not texted each other since then or spoken since then. Mike was on I Missed the Show yesterday. I was right there in the studio. There was no...
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't say anything. I was expecting you to chime in on that. Did Don tell you not to?
No, he did not tell me not to. And, of course, if he would have said, hey, Sid, here or something, I would have jumped on. But it's I Missed the Show at the end. It's not mine, so I'm not going to jump in unless he tells me to. But I did, Zach, I did send Mike a text yesterday right after he was done with the I Missed interview, and I said, listen, putting all of our personal feelings aside, you have had an amazing career, and you've inspired a heck of a lot of guys, and thanks for the memories, and good luck. And I showed it to a couple of guys around the I Miss Show and in the office, and the first thing they said this morning was, when I got in early, was, did Mike respond? And I said, of course not. I don't expect him to, but the answer is yes. I did reach out to Mike, and I do wish him well.
And you know this better than anybody. If it wasn't for Dog and Chris, I don't know if we have jobs in this industry today, just because of the success that they had on early and what the platform and what radio did become. And a big part of that is because they had a successful show, and many people did not think at the time that show was going to work. And a few months in, they thought that show was going to be a disaster. But if you look at that show, no matter what you think of Mike, whether you love him or you hate him, you always listened in at 1 p.m. to hear Mike's monologues and also his classic interviews. And as we know, he is broadcasting excellence and was a big-time pioneer in the sports radio business.
No, listen, I'd be silly to argue that. That would just be nothing but bias and prejudice. And, of course, those guys are at the very top of the list when you talk about the all-time greats. I mean, I would argue, of course, that, it was really Imus that saved the day. Mike and Chris were going nowhere. That station was going nowhere.
And they would tell you that. They would tell you that about Imus. They're very complimentary to Imus.
So it's not really Mike and Chris. It was Don Imus, who I still work with, by the way. And now, of course, with Connell McShane leaving, I'll have even a bigger role. Imus saved the day, not Mike and Chris. But for sports talk radio purposes, yes, those guys have always been the industry standard. They will continue to be, and a lot of people have great jobs today because of those guys. Now, of course, I don't do sports talk radio anymore. I'm into the political news world, but I started doing that stuff, and I certainly credit Mike and Chris and thank them for giving me my opportunity along the way, and as you do and many, many others. So, look, does Mike Francesa deserve a ton of credit today and a ton of accolades? Even his biggest detractors. And I'm not really a detractor. I'm bitter with Mike Francesa because he's lied for the longest time about our personal relationship, and I can't stand that. But I'll be the first to say he deserves all the accolades, all the attention, and he's been great to all of us in this industry for the last 30 years.
What do you think Mike and Sid would have sounded like if they eventually went through with that to replace
Dog?
It
would have been great. I think it would have been great. Listen, I mean, Dog and I are very, very similar in that we're both very, very passionate. We both have a tendency to get very, very loud. We both have a tendency to get all riled up at the drop of a dime. I think that the Mike and Sid dynamic would have been very, very similar to Mike and Chris. And I know Mike knew that. And I think that's exactly why Mike reached out to me as soon as Chris said goodbye. Of course, Max Kellerman was the third part of that wheel because Mike wanted a two-man show when he went on vacation. He wanted the guy that was the analytics guy because I was the emotion guy. He wanted the Yankee guy because I was the Met guy. He had tons of great reasons why the three of us worked out together. But I think Mike knew and still would admit in a moment of truth that the Mike-Sid dynamic would have been very similar to Mike and Chris.
Now, I need to call you out for something. Do you have any idea what it is?
I have no idea. Let me give me one hint.
It had something to do last time you were on this show. You promised it would be a big deal, and it was not a big deal.
Oh, yeah. It was something about seeing Mike
at
the
at Grand Central. And I told you weren't going to say a damn thing to him.
You know what's funny about that is it was, you're going to laugh about this, but Mark Chernoff, the program director at WFAN, made sure that I was nowhere near Mike. You have to understand.
They probably had really Secret Service around him with you in the building.
No kidding. They had this long table. And in front of the table was the ropes, of course, and behind the ropes was the public that came to watch the show. Well, behind this table were curtains, and behind those curtains, Zach, was where the talent would be hanging out. So they made sure that Francesa was behind the curtain. As soon as I was done with Joe and Evan, Shoney walked over and said, "Listen, I love you. You are great. Thank you for coming, but please do me a favor and get the F out of here now before Mike comes out." So when I tell you that I was prepared to see him and maybe even say hello or see what happens next, Chernoff and the powers that be made sure that there was no way Rosenberg and Francesa would even see each other, let alone come into contact.
Now, I know the relationship with Mike and you have changed over the years, but you guys did have many great memories together. I remember him calling Fear at the Pier on the morning on the Imus show along with Mad Dog. Talk about some of the better memories that you had with Mike when you were once doing the middays at WFAN.
Well, that was the biggest one. And, to this day, Joe Beningo says that was the best show ever in the history of WFAN. That's hard to argue when you consider that Bernie and I boxed on MSNBC television around the world, over 150 radio stations
and you got your
around
ass
the
kicked.
world.
I remember rooting for you as a kid.
I did get my ass kicked. I did, yes. But I would caution people to say that to my face. I know you're a big kid, by the way, Zach.
I could take you in a second. I could take you in a second.
Well, I don't know. You're taller and younger, but I think I got more muscle. But I wouldn't mess with you.
That's fine.
I wouldn't mess with you.
You would get one right hook and you would be down, Sid.
That's probably true. Listen, that was 13 years ago. But what a star-studded cast we had. It was Imus. It was Mike and the Mad Dog, Marv Albert, Mike Breen,
That's
that
right.
little jerk Mike Lupica, that jerk Mike Barnacles. We had a ton of great people on the dais that day. But I got to tell you, there were so many great back and forths. I mean, people forget, but so many times Joe Beningo and I would end our show, or even me and Jody Mack, and Mike and Chris would say to me, stay there, and they would start their show by having me on. And I would fight with Dog about tennis or whatever may have happened that day. And, and of course, every single morning, of course, Francesa, I should say every afternoon, Francesa would come in a bit early before his show, make his way into the back office, Imus's back office, and sit down with Imus and record, and sometimes me, and we'd laugh a ton. So there was a lot of funny times and a lot of back and forth. And, I tell you again, even when he reached out to me to work, when Dog left, we had some great phone conversations and had a great meeting in Queens that day. But overall, before it got kind of ugly between the two of us, it was a lot of laughs. And Mike was a really, really good, I want to say, supporter of mine. I'll tell you this. I went to San Diego for the Super Bowl, and it was the Buccaneers against the Raiders. And I was supposed to do a Saturday night show on WFAN, and Chernoff said to me, he goes, I'm not putting you on the schedule because you're going out to San Diego. It's the Super Bowl. You're going to go to a party. You're not going to do your show. I'm like, Cherny, I'll do it. Put me on the schedule. So, of course, Chernoff was right. I go out Friday night. I get whacked out of my face. So it comes to Saturday night, and I can't do the show. I'm wasted. So I call Chris Carlin, and I'm like, Bunny, do the show for me. And he was being a real jerk about it. He's like, I'm not doing it. You shouldn't have gotten drunk, giving me life's lessons. So then I called Mike. It's a true story. And I said, hey, Mike, and he could tell in my voice. He goes, oh, my God, what'd you do? I said, listen, it's a long story, but I can't do the show tonight. Could you please convince Carlin to do the show for me? And sure enough, Francesa not only convinced Carlin to do the show for me, but never said a word to anybody that I was too hammered to do the show.
Wow.
So
has that story ever been told before? I've never heard that. I've known you for a long time.
That has never been told publicly before.
Wow.
A few people, including Imus, know about that. But Mike not only made sure Carlin did the show, but he kept that between the two of us.
That's very. I'm surprised to hear that. I very am. As we're talking to Sid Rosenberg from 770 WABC. One more on Mike Francesa leaving. Just with everything that has gone on with our business, and we talk about the replacements and everything. With Mike now leaving the industry, you look at the future of WFAN, and I'll tell you, you have the new afternoon show. You also have the new morning show as well. So it's an interesting time in the sports radio landscape.
Well, listen, I never thought I would see the day when Boomer Esiason was the biggest star at WFAN, but that's where we are. Carlin is still kind of a up-and-comer. I know he's had the SNY stuff and a good job in Philly, but fact is people around the country don't know Chris Carlin as a great radio guy. Bart Scott is a football player, basically. Maggie Gray, she's done a very good job on the network on CBS. She's a good writer, but she's not necessarily known as a big-time radio personality. You got Evan and Joe. They're terrific, and they've been around forever. It will be around forever, but when you talk about star power, the guy at WFAN is basically the former quarterback of the Jets and a guy that's a host on the NFL Today show. So that's how it's changed. There was a time when you had Imus, who was about, he's top 2 or 3 right there with Howard Stern. You had Mike and Chris. That's 1 and 2 in the history of sports talk radio. You had me and other guys. You had a lot of real radio talent, specific radio talent. Right now at WFAN, that's not the case. Doesn't mean it's not going to be great. Doesn't mean it won't be interesting and good radio down the road. But right now, that's not the case.
Yeah, I'll tell you, one more memory of Mike just popped into my mind because I remember I was there for one of them. I would always remember the first day of the NCAA tournament. Do you remember how many pizzas he used to order? Like, it would be unbelievable. That would be one of the best days. I remember I skipped school one day to go into work with my dad. And just watching the games that day was great.
That was a great day, and that reminds me of one more story with Mike. He was in a big NCAA basketball pool every single year. He may still be in it, but guys like Jim Nance and Billy Packer, all the big guys, all his buddies, he invited me to go into it one year. and I did very, very well. In fact, it went down to the final game, Monday night, Connecticut, with Khalid El Amin and those guys taking on Georgia Tech for the national championship game. I had Georgia Tech. Mike had UConn. The winner of that game won the actual tournament. I had a chance to beat him, Billy Packer, Jim Nance, all those guys. Now, as it turned out, of course, he won. But the best part of that story was the next day I was going to go in and go on to his show with Dog and kind of eat crow for losing the tournament. But something happened along the way, and that is my daughter Ava was born the next day.
Wow. How about that?
So I was inside the doing the show with Jody Mack, and wanted to go with Mike and Chris, half hour later. And Eddie Scazzeri came in at the break and said, "You have an important phone call," and it was Danielle. She was in labor, and that was it. My first child was born.
770 WABC. We're talking to Sid Rosenberg from 770 WABC. All right, let's get into this game coming up on Sunday. You got the Giants and the Eagles. We know the Eagles 11-2, but they have now lost Carson Wentz for the season. You being a Giant fan know that once Phil Simms went down, Hostetler came in. The Eagles still have a strong defense, still have a good rushing attack, being number 2 in the league. Nick Foles now in at starter. Just reminisce a little bit about what you remember from Hostetler coming in that Giants team and the run that they went on, eventually getting the Super Bowl victory.
That is a great analogy. A great analogy. The Giants were 10-1 that year. Beat the 49ers in Monday Night Football, that famous Mark Bavaro dragging Ronnie Lott and about 10 Niner defenders down the field. And Simms was playing great. Ironically, Simms got hurt. I was at the game on a really cold, snowy, damp Sunday against the Buffalo Bills up in New York. And, of course, the Giants went on to play the Buffalo Bills and win the Super Bowl. But it's a great comparison because, like you said, the Giants were strong defensively like the Eagles are. The Giants ran the ball very well that year with Rodney Hampton and Otis Anderson, and they didn't make a lot of big plays in the passing game. They didn't have to. They had Bavaro, they had Stephen Baker, and they got the job done. This Eagle team is much more prolific, even with Nick Foles at quarterback in their offensive attack. Let's not forget a couple years ago, Nick Foles had the best touchdown-to-interception ratio in football.
At 27-2 in 2013 with the Eagles.
That's right. So this guy can play, and he's got great weapons. Jeffrey's having a great year. And I got to tell you, I don't know what the hell the Dolphins were thinking. I know that the coach down there doesn't like Ajayi, but he is a beast of a running back. So
for a fourth-round pick, too, Sid, a fourth-round pick, that's all it took, and it's a good contract right now.
It's unbelievable. So this is a much more prolific attack offensively for the Eagles than the Giants were. And if you're asking me, do I think that the season is over now because Wentz, who's been great, should have won the MVP, maybe, is out? I say no. I say this is still a very dangerous team. May very well still be the best team inside the NFC. And I think the Eagles have a shot to still go to the Super Bowl. I really do.
They still have a shot. I don't think it's going to happen. I was convinced they were going to be in the Super Bowl.
Well, it all depends on, do you think the Saints are that great? Do you think the Rams are that great? Do you think the Panthers or the Vikings are that great? And my answer is no. The Vikings are playing with a backup quarterback, too. And, who's so great in the NFC that the Eagles can't beat them? The answer really is nobody.
And that's why they still have a shot. But when you look at it, and I know this is not anything that is not other than obvious. It's a very obvious thing. But if you look at the way that Wentz was playing this year, in the red zone, on third down, and third and long, too, and also the way he protected the football, it's going to be extremely tough to replace, and there is going to be a drop-off. We know that. And the question is Nick Foles 27-2 closer to 27-2 or 10-13 when he left the Eagles, which was his touchdown-interception ratio?
No, listen, I get you, but there was also a drop-off between Simms and Hostetler that year, too.
No question.
Now, of course, Haas was able to get away from the pressure, and Simms would have fumbled when Bruce Smith hit Haas in the end zone in the Super Bowl, and Haas didn't. But I'm just telling you, I look at the Rams. Goff is a very young quarterback. I look at Minnesota. Keenum is not exactly Johnny Unitas. The Saints have got Drew Brees, but Cam Newton is far from a big-time guy every Sunday. I look at the rest of the competition inside the NFC, and it just speaks to me that this Eagle team is still very dangerous.
Who's the next Giants head coach? Who do you want to see be the next head coach?
Listen, it's going to be a young guy. Bill Cowher talked about it today. It's not going to be a big name. I don't think it's going to be Nick Saban. I think it's going to be one of these young, up-and-coming guys, maybe a guy like, Jim Bossel's son even, maybe a guy like John Bossel with the Rams. But I don't expect either name, Zach, a GM or coach, to be a very sexy name for the Giants. They just don't do that. Whether it's Bill Parcells, when he started, that wasn't a sexy name. Ray Hanley wasn't a sexy name. The only really sexy name they've had the last 20 years has been Dan Reeves. Fossil wasn't a sexy name. McAdoo, I should say that Copeland was, obviously. But I think the Giants, coach and GM, go with guys, young guys, not necessarily sexy names that can restore the Giants. Listen, they've got two big decisions to make, okay? One is, who's the next quarterback, because Eli Manning is just about done. And secondly, do you want to build this team around a guy who is completely disruptive, despite his talent, completely disruptive in Odell Beckham Jr.?
And that's the thing. The next coach going to be able to have to control Odell to some level. I don't think Odell is as bad as some with some of the personality stuff, but there's no question it has been a distraction. He needs to change that a little bit. And the last regime, they told him to grow up, and he didn't grow up. So I'm curious to see what Odell is. We know he has the talent, but how does this new coach handle that dynamic? That's going to be the biggest part of the job.
I think he is that bad, and I really believe this whole thing started the beginning of the end for Ben McAdoo, who's not a very good coach anyway, and I want him to go anyway. But the beginning of the end all started with OBJ and that ill-advised trip down to Miami before the Packer playoff game last year. And that was just one of about 20 incidents with OBJ in just a couple of years. So to me, he is that bad, and he needs to be corralled, and I'm not sure any coach can do that in the NFL.
Is this a Shockey type of ending? Do you see them eventually moving on from him?
I don't, because he's just too good, and that's the catch-22, Zach, and that's what becomes tough. Talent-wise, he's right up there with, Jones in Atlanta, Brown in Pittsburgh. He's as good as anybody, but he really is a very disruptive guy. So Giants got to figure things out. Hopefully he figures it out. But right now he's just too good to say goodbye, but it's a big catch-22.
And on this, where's Eli Manning playing football next year?
I look at a team like Jacksonville, maybe reunites with Tom Coughlin. Why not? Although I got to tell you, Blake Bortles has really been terrific, much better as of late, and that team's got sole possession of first place, so maybe they don't give up on him. And then, of course, everybody says the same thing. What about John Elway out in Denver? You saw them beat the Colts last night, but neither Trevor Siemian or Paxton Lynch or a guy like Brock Osweiler is a long-term answer. So Elway won a Super Bowl with Peyton Manning. Maybe he tries it again with the younger Manning, and they give Eli a shot out in Denver. So, to me, teams like Denver, Jacksonville, those could be likely landing spots for Eli.
And I'll ask you one more thing, and I'll relate it to what you do now for 770 WABC. We know what happened in New York, Port Authority. Just give us an update on that. I know that it was, the bomb went off on the guy, and the pipe bomb, and luckily not too many people got injured from it. So give us an update about that.
Well, nobody got hurt really except for the actual bomber himself.
Well, didn't they have sent 3 people to the hospital, though? I thought I read that.
No, what happened was the people that you're talking about were experiencing headaches because of the sound from the bomb, but no injuries, like no lacerations, no cuts, no bruises, just reverberating headaches because of the sound of the bomb. The guy that actually did it, that moron, he's only got to really get hurt. And look, it was a bungled job by this guy. The bomb he built was not very good. It went off too early to be anyway, so it didn't really matter. But listen, it just goes to remind you, this guy was from Bangladesh, lived in Brooklyn for 7 years, and just hated everything about our country, hated the Christmas holiday, hated the freedoms. It just goes to remind you that for all the craziness that it sounds like Donald Trump is spewing every single day, that it's not all that crazy. And there's a lot of people and a lot of countries out there that still want to wreak a tremendous amount of havoc and damage to this great country. So before we get too carried away with Donald Trump being a racist and hateful and all these crazy words that they attach to Donald Trump, this guy is another reminder. There's plenty of folks out there every single day that still want to kill us.
Sid, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Zachy, I love you. You're doing great. I'm proud of you. Happy New Year, kid.
Appreciate it. Have a good New Year and happy holidays to you and your family. There's Sid Rosenberg from 770 WABC.